Yesterday, NBC News investigations correspondent Tom Winter and national correspondent for Politico, Betsy Woodruff-Swan. Good morning to you both. So, Tom, we've all got MSNBC on in our offices yesterday. Mike Memley's doing a good job. It is so confusing, even to people who thought they understood this case. What exactly happened yesterday?
So I think the judge had some questions. There were some, she raised some questions as far as it being an unusual type of agreement with respect to the pretrial diversion. She asked some questions as far as, when she asked the prosecutor, is there any case precedent for bringing in the judge for the pretrial diversion agreement? Remember, most of the time, this is an effort to keep people out of court, to give them effectively a second chance. So the judge never sees these agreements. It's essentially you come forward, you have your first appearance, and then boom, you're out the door and you're on your way. And as long as you follow that agreement, you're never going to be before the court again, and you're probably going to have your case dismissed. So all of a sudden, she's asking questions. Wait a minute, why do you eventually one day want me to rule or make some determination as to whether or not it's possible that Hunter Biden could have violated terms of this agreement? Should he do it? You're asking me to be an arbiter. She had some questions. Are you bringing me in here to be a gatekeeper, essentially, for prosecutors to file charges in the future? And she says, from a separation of powers standpoint, from a constitutional standpoint, I've got some problems with that. That's not up to the bench, to the judiciary, to make determinations as far as whether charges are filed. Typically, with a pretrial diversion agreement, we might see a situation where if somebody were to break it, prosecutors would come forward, they might file charges, and then you would go through the normal trial process and have it dismissed. So that was just one of the things that she keyed in on yesterday, and she telegraphed right away in court that she had some questions, and she raised this early. So it wasn't a surprise to any of us that this was not going to be a rubber stamp, if you will.
So what was it like, Tom, inside the courtroom? It appears everyone was sort of thrown off by it. They were caught off guard. They thought they had an easy in, walk out of the courtroom day, and it became something completely different.
Well, I've never experienced like that in the 11, 12 years that I've been here covering high-profile cases for NBC. It was really a surprising day because you don't typically expect judges to get into the real details. They have an absolute responsibility to look out actually for Hunter Biden, make sure he's of sound mind and body, that he understands the terms of that plea agreement. And all of a sudden, she's really getting into the contract language of what's going on, because that's what it is. It's a contract between Hunter Biden and the government of the United States. She's pulling this apart, and I think everybody had some questions. And then all of a sudden, you saw a real gulf in the understanding of what does this plea agreement cover with respect to immunity to future charges. And all of a sudden, you had the prosecutors, an attorney for Hunter Biden, Chris Clark. They're having a serious disagreement about what that's about. At one point, in one of the areas where the judge called for a recess, you have Chris Clark coming over to the prosecution table, standing not far from the distance between you and me, and saying, look, we'll rip it up. We'll rip up this agreement. And they've been working on this for over a year. This is a 5 years long investigation. So you can imagine for them the type of feeling that they had. You could tell as the day progressed, the tone in Hunter Biden's voice really started to drop, as the enormity of, I thought today was going to be the day I would put this behind me after sentencing, but I got this plea in. I've got a kind of a clean bill of health going forward legally, and all of a sudden this is melting away before my eyes. And his attorney is certainly shocked. You can imagine the hours that they've worked on this. So yeah, there was a real sense of, whoa, this is going off the rails fast. I've talked to a number of legal analysts. They suggest that this was these were questions perhaps that the judge definitely should have asked. And so I haven't heard anybody say yet that the judge herself brought it off the rails. It seems like there was some language in here that perhaps should have been thought out ahead of time and perhaps can be corrected, but just a discussion between the two parties. But as we were talking about in the break, once you start opening up a contract, all of a sudden people are going to have their say.
A quick note, but I think an important one that you made, which is that every time we talk about the judge in this case, they say she's a Trump-appointed judge, which is true, and means that it's difficult for Trump and his supporters to go after her if it doesn't fall her way. But she's not exactly a ride or die MAGA Republican.
Right. So we looked at the FEC filings for her donations. She had donated at one point to Hillary Clinton, to John McCain, Mitt Romney, not exactly the hardcore members of the Freedom Caucus, and no donations that we could find, at least belonging to Donald, that she gave to Donald Trump. So I think it is important for people to keep that.
Yeah, just some important background. So Betsy, you were there yesterday as well in the courtroom. Your impressions of what you saw, but also where this leaves Hunter Biden now and where this leaves this case.
It's a big mess for DOJ. I was sitting right behind the group of Hunter's lawyers in the courtroom, and before the hearing started, I saw Hunter Biden and his team sign the pretrial diversion agreement. David Weiss, the U.S. attorney supervising Hunter's investigation, signed that agreement as well before the hearing began. And over the course of the hearing, Hunter's lawyers and Justice Department lawyers both reiterated that the pretrial diversion agreement was a binding contract between DOJ and Hunter Biden. Before the whole hearing mess unfurled, they had signed that contract. In the words of DOJ's own prosecutors, they had entered that contract. So the next question, of course, is what exactly did DOJ sign on to? That contract, the document itself, has not gone up on Pacer, where the vast majority of court filings actually go up. However, last night I obtained a copy of the contract and we published it at Politico so people can read the whole thing for themselves. The copy that we obtained shows that David Weiss, Hunter Biden, and Chris Clark, Hunter's lawyer, all signed that contract on July 26th. One of the huge issues, as Tom said, that came up in court yesterday is this question of just how broad was DOJ's promise in this contract not to bring future charges against Hunter Biden. And for folks following along at home, on paragraph 15 of the pretrial diversion agreement, it's actually very clear in very simple language that the Justice Department is promising not to bring charges against Hunter for everything detailed in what's called the stipulation of facts, the statement of facts. That's also part of now those filings. The statement of facts about Hunter's tax charges, as put forward by the Justice Department and Hunter's legal team, includes lots of details about Hunter's work for Burisma, the controversial Ukrainian energy company, and for CEFC, a controversial Chinese company that Hunter worked with at the time. Hunter's lawyers could argue, and the document itself shows, that the Justice Department is promising not to bring charges against Hunter related to those companies. In court, DOJ lawyers said that they believe they could still bring charges related to FARA or related to allegations of illegal foreign government lobbying. But if you read the document itself, it's pretty clear that DOJ signed on to something that's much broader than what they said in court that it signed on to. It's a mess for DOJ.
So Betsy, again, on behalf of the people watching at home and trying to follow this at home, how is it, they would ask, I would think, how is it that in a courtroom yesterday, in a case that didn't begin a month ago, a case that's been ongoing for years and in the public eye for years, talked about, discussed and everything, how is it that a specific prosecutor in the U.S. Attorney's Office and a group of high-powered, quite expensive lawyers for the defense could not have figured out that there might be some discrepancy in the agreement that was about to go forward at the midnight hour, that they didn't do this prior to that? How is it that that happened?
Mike, it's such a good question, and that's why yesterday, in retrospect, I believe, will be seen as a little bit of a moment of the Justice Department kind of stepping on a rake. Verbally in court, we saw this bizarre disagreement over what's arguably the single most important piece of this deal. Just how much protection does Hunter Biden get? We saw a verbal disagreement in court. The judge honed in on it in the final minutes of the hearing. But remember, that disagreement is just a conversation about a contract, and the language in the contract itself is very clear. DOJ promised Hunter Biden broad immunity. And here's the other piece that's really important that puts DOJ in such an uncomfortable spot. Justice Department lawyers signed off on the pretrial diversion agreement, but then Hunter Biden himself pleaded not guilty. This was supposed to be a two-parter for DOJ. They were supposed to promise protection for Hunter in exchange for a guilty plea, but instead, that Justice Department prosecutor signed off on his piece of the deal before the hearing started, assuming the hearing would go in a very predictable, normal, boring way. And then during the hearing, right off the bat, things really went sideways. So now, DOJ has made a broad promise of immunity to Hunter Biden. There's some verbal disagreements about how just broad that promise is, but the language itself is clear. And at the same time, they haven't yet gotten what they were hoping and expecting Hunter to give to them, which was that guilty plea. It's just an extraordinarily uncomfortable moment for the Justice Department, and it's unlike anything the legal experts that I've spoken to have seen.
So, Tom, how does this shake out from here now in your assessment of everything you've heard, everything you're reporting, everything you just heard from Betsy? What do you see here?
I think Betsy's keyed in on something that we haven't seen these documents uploaded to Pacer yet. She's obtained a copy, but what I'm not clear about, and what we didn't have clarity on in court yesterday, the judge did not accept or reject the plea agreement. We don't know about the pretrial diversion agreement, and so she has questions about that. Is that even in effect? So is any of this in effect, is the question. Now, I asked Chuck Rosenberg and a couple of our legal analysts this morning, I said, could any of Hunter Biden's statements yesterday, or the fact that they all signed this plea agreement, be entered into a future proceeding against them in case this actually does go to trial? Chuck seems to think that it can't because of federal rules of evidence, but you've really got this complete state of limbo where you have the trial clock has started. You look at this court docket this morning, it looks like any other proceeding where somebody is actually going to trial. There's an exclusion for the Speedy Trial Act, there's a pretrial release. So this is acting right now as if it's a case that's going to trial. Again, I think it's likely they get to a point where there's a deal here again, but this is not, it's not at all clear to me what has actually been accepted, what is actually in play. And I think it's interesting, and I think the judge keyed in on this, and we'll have to see if this changes, to your question, Willie, over the long term. Where does this go from here? It's interesting that there were more broad protections in the pretrial diversion agreement for Hunter Biden, to Betsy's point, than what we saw in the plea agreement. So I have a question. Were they trying to hide the ball here as far as the scope of the future immunity for Hunter Biden? Why did they do that? It's unusual. The judge pointed that out. Why not just put that in the regular plea agreement? So I think I want to get a better handle of the documents. We're attempting to get in some of those answers and some of those details today, and there's more reporting to be done, but where this goes from here and what all these things actually say and what's in effect, I think is going to be really important.
Chaotic day. It's still a little bit confusing. So, Jonathan Lemire, that's what was going on inside the courtroom. Let's talk about what was happening in Washington while all this was going on, where you are right now, which is Republicans seizing on this as somehow vindication that, yes, this was a deal where Hunter Biden got off easy and that it didn't make sense when you read it on paper, claiming victory in some sense in their ongoing investigation and attacks on Hunter Biden.
Yeah, it's a political mess, and Republicans have indeed seized upon it.